Welcome to the Ridgecrest podcast. This is where we take a look at various challenges that face the church, our culture, or even community from a biblical perspective. My name is Matt. I'm the Executive and Discipleship Pastor here at Ridgecrest. This is our Senior Pastor, Michael Estes.
How are you today?
Very well, and yourself?
I'm doing well. We got through the bad weather this week, and now we're in some beautiful weather. It's very odd. We're at a part of the year where normally it's hot here, and it feels wonderful outside.
Yeah, outside's pretty nice today. Like I was expecting. I actually got cold inside, and so I was like, I'm gonna go outside and get in the sun. No, I was like, oh man, it's cold out here. But yeah, it's nice. Yeah,
I'll go ahead and tell you right now, it's gonna make my wife angry later on. Jackson, our oldest, has a baseball game, and we usually don't complain about cold weather baseball because we know at some point it's going to get really, really hot.
Right.
Every game we've been to, with the exception of one so far that he's played in since he's been playing high school baseball, has been so cold. And it will be cold again tonight. She's taking a blanket. She's got her jacket, and she'll leave that game cold.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm okay with it though.
Yeah.
For right now.
Yeah, I don't mind, and I don't mind heat either.
Have you? Well, I was about to ask you. Have you had to cut your yard yet?
I did. Yeah.
See, I cut mine as well. And, that's when I know, hey, we're moving into spring weather, starting to kind of think about summer, that sort of thing.
That's right. Yeah, because I did mine right before one of these last few storms we had, because I was like, I want to get it cut before.
Of course.
Yeah. So, we have some neighbors that still haven't, and I'm glad I took time to do that before.
Ankle high, knee high.
Yeah, it's getting there.
Yeah. All right, coffee cup of the day. This is this one harkens back. If you've been a fan of the podcast for a long time and have watched it religiously, you know about this particular coffee cup. But in case you haven't been, or you're new to the podcast, this coffee cup was given to me by my sister,
right? Which
very clearly expresses our relationship to one another. The world's okay as pastor. She gave this to me as soon as the church decided to call me as the pastor. She immediately sent this to me. Yeah. And I laughed out loud. Yeah. As soon as I saw it.
That's good. And that is a very sibling gift mug. I mean, very much so.
I drink out of it on a regular basis. She's trying to keep me humble.
That's right. I
appreciate her.
What are siblings for, right? We have parents to boost the ego.
That's right.
We've got, siblings to bring us back down to reality.
That's what they're there for.
That's right.
One of my favorite parts of this is, so we were talking about punctuation in text messages. How do you feel about punctuation in text messages?
I use punctuation in text messages.
Okay. So I was talking with Lorelai and one of her friends the other night, and they were talking about how a period at the end of a text message is aggressive. It makes it sound angry. So like I'm bringing this around. The period at the end of this is just an aggressive way of reminding me that I'm the world's okay as pastor. But like, have you ever heard that before? I had students tell me that when I was a teacher.
No, I haven't, but I think that also reveals how far removed I am from, it's just progression of age.
How is it that I am younger in technology age than you?
Well, you got teenagers.
Yeah, I guess that's
so you have somebody to learn it from. I've got a 7-year-old who doesn't have anything like that, and so there's things that he teaches me as a 7-year-old, and so like here when he hits teenager years, then I'll pass
updating me. Yeah,
that's right.
Stephen, how do you feel about punctuation in text messages? You're younger than both of us.
I feel like I text like an old person.
Okay.
I don't think periods are aggressive, but I do think that you can use punctuation to convey aggression.
Of course, that's what exclamation points are.
Right.
Or all caps.
All caps, yeah.
It's like the thing. I don't know how to explain it, but I know it when I see it.
Sure.
I think that's kind of.
But see, I say sure. That to me is one of the things that drives me nuts about text messages is the open interpretation that takes place as someone reads a text message. I've done the same thing. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I can read a text message and interpret somebody's emotional state immediately. Sometimes it takes multiple times of reading it. But for them to say something along the lines of, I'm going to the store, period, is a way of me yelling at it.
Whoa.
I was like...
Because they thought about saying more, and they were like, nah, but they didn't get rid of the period.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be upset that there's a period. It means that the thought has ended. But they're angry at me.
Yeah.
I should be going to the
Yes.
store for them. It's passive aggressive, I guess. I don't know.
That's interesting. Because I do think it's just funny. Of course, I think it shines light to kind of the quickness of our culture a little bit too.
Sure.
Because now, adding a period, that's one more movement, that you got to do to send a text. And we're always trying to shorten things down and condense and all those types of things. And so when they feel as though you're going to that extra length to, even though it's just a period, no one does periods anymore.
I gotta hurry up and watch my TikToks.
Yeah.
I don't have time for a period.
Yeah, that's right. Because we have very, very busy lives. So now, a Ridgecrest podcast, not only, I guess that touches on the cultural issue side.
There we go.
As you're
a challenge
texting.
that we face as we communicate with one another.
Yeah.
It sometimes
Be aware.
I guess punctuation's bad.
Can be.
Maybe it's good.
Can
I don't
be.
know.
Well, that's like, of course, you had this conversation, probably 10 years ago, maybe longer now, of, individuals when they first started texting or emailing, sending all caps, right? And you had this situation, it's like, why are they yelling at me? And it's not that they're yelling at you. They're just either don't know how to make it lowercase font, or they just out of habit. You just hit caps lock on the keyboard.
Or they're just trying to see what they're typing.
That's right.
They don't have the readers that day, and so hey, I'm going to all caps the sucker and start typing. I can see everything that's on the screen now.
That's right. And so you see, those things kind of progress through culture, right. And it'll be interesting to see eventually. I can't help but think of The Office, and when Kevin decides to reduce the amount of words he says. Why use lots of words when few?
Use much when few words?
Oh, that's.
Well, how far are we away from? This is where we're going to sound like complete dinosaurs. How far are we away from just using emojis to communicate with each other? We're back in ancient Egypt. Now we have hieroglyphs. So we're just using emojis and GIFs and memes to communicate information back and forth to each other. I'm not going to lie. I use GIFs on a fairly regular basis to communicate my thoughts.
Yeah, it's fun, right?
Yeah, of course.
And I don't use them a whole lot, but every now and then, Whitney will text me something, and it very much warrants a GIF in return.
Absolutely.
And then we'll kind of get kind of send several GIFs back and forth, continuing the conversation. It's fun, right? Because then you're having to kind of think through it, and it involves a little bit of creativity anyway. But then
So do words.
Nah, words
are
don't.
hard. Words are hard.
Yeah. So we've provided you, information on how to understand how to text better,
I
and
guess.
more efficiently or less offensively.
Yeah, there you go.
To those.
We're here to help you improve your communication skills.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So in this episode, we're gonna perhaps maybe over the next few episodes kind of talk a little bit about church health and look at some issues impacting that. We just are on I guess kind of on the tails of the COVID pandemic, which completely altered reality as we know it, right? Workplaces changed, churches changed, everyone, you kind of mobilized to this new way of doing things immediately. Early on it was all virtual, all Zoom meetings and things like that. Now you're on the back end of it, where if someone hears Zoom, they twitch kind of deal, where people are just tired of all that. But regardless of that, it's important to recognize how those things did affect the church and how they affected people within the church, right?
Yeah.
And so, here we are, kind of this post-COVID culture, figuring out, what this looks like, because the gospel is still the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
The point of the gospel and spreading it around, the world is still the point. We just got to figure out, how we do that better, and how individuals are going to be, the whole respond differently in this culture. So,
also, what does a healthy church look like?
that's right.
Post COVID, because we had ideas about. You and I have talked about this a good bit. We've had ideas about what the church, what signifies health within the church. If you go back to the church growth movement, which is still very much influential in how we view church health a lot of times, the key indicator is, well, how many people showed up for something, or how often did they show up for something? And
very business minded model.
yeah,
right.
and there's probably some merit to that. Like
Sure.
if nobody shows up, are you doing anything to benefit other people? Are you doing anything that would attract other people to the gospel? That sort of thing. But you can also do things that aren't very gospel related that get lots of people to show up. And so like there's a balance to be found in the concept of like numerical growth and those are things. I just want to bring up a part of an article that we're not going to discuss today, but we'll probably come back to and discuss more later.
Sure.
It was an article in Christianity Today. The other article we're going to look at is also from Christianity Today. But the question that the author proposes is how can we think afresh about church health? And she makes the statement that a truly healthy congregation is one that's made up of people at different points of the journey of faith. Alongside mature disciples, there are immature Christians, people with all sorts of serious problems, and non-Christians too. This is what a church that embraces the Great Commission looks like. So if you're pastoring a congregation with some dysfunctional, conflict-prone, or ego-driven people, good work. And I think a lot of times we think of a healthy church as a place where a lot of people are showing up and everybody's getting along and everybody's unified and all things, and there's never any conflict or there's never any disagreement about the way things should be done. And the truth of the matter is, if we have people all along the spectrum of growing as disciples, you've got the discipleship, Will, that you've talked about a good bit with members of our church. You've got people that are supposed to be spiritual infants on that wheel. You've got people that are supposed to be in adolescence. You've got people that are supposed to be full-grown adults. And then you have people that aren't even on the wheel yet.
That's right.
That's what a good, healthy church looks like. And I think a lot of times we as pastors a lot of times make this mistake. We think that everybody should be at the adult stage. And the reality is that's not going to be the case.
Sure.
And
it's also dangerous to be on the other side of that too,
That's
right.
right?
Because, anytime I've talked through that wheel, I always talk about that. I fully believe the healthiest churches are ones that have good representation of all the phases.
Right.
But there are some churches who focus in and say, hey, all we care about is reaching the lost, and seeing them convert to Christianity or make professions of faith.
Right.
And so very much, outreach focused, which is fantastic.
Yep.
But if you're saying, okay, our job's just to get you saved, there's a whole nother spiritual growth thing, a whole process of sanctification that the church is missing out on. So, even though they're maybe seeing a whole lot of people come to faith, if they're not joining in the sanctification process, I think there's, that's another sign of unhealthy, behavior.
Well, it goes back to the idea of the church being the family of God. As members of a family, you have people in all age ranges and all kind of categories, and somehow all of those people come together as one family, and that's what we should see as the church. And what happens is within a family, you have people that they get married and they bring new people into the family and they have children, and now you have more. The family goes on and grows and that sort of thing. We as believers are supposed to do something very similar, where we're disciples who make disciples who make disciples. Yeah. And so there's a replication process that should go on as a way of the way we do things.
That's right.
So that's what a healthy church should look like.
Yeah. And so, I think we'll probably spend a few episodes, at least kind of walking through some of these things. And this week, I mentioned COVID, and it resulted in some individuals disengaging from the church. Even before that, you had, the article that we're going to kind of talk through today was from Christianity Today, and it was written kind of from a perspective of someone, he's church planter, right? And he's, his name's Mike Moore, if I remember correctly, and he kind of writes through the different types of people that have disengaged from the church right now.
Yeah.
And some of them, are, I guess, probably the most common or the most understood would be your nuns, right? And that's Nones.
Yeah, not the Catholic ladies that walk around with a habit on.
That's right.
Yeah.
These are your Nones's.
Yes.
And these are individuals who, do not identify with any religious organization.
Yeah.
We know, if you heard the interview that we had with a local pastor, Josh Brady, he mentioned some research that was done, and he mentioned this idea that what was it?
62% of the
62.
people in our area, which for those who maybe are listening outside of our area, we live in a very church-saturated, gospel-saturated in a lot of ways area where like there is good gospel representation, there are good church representation. I mean, literally, you walk across a 6-acre field from us. There's another church right next to us that I believe is doing good gospel ministry. You ride down the road 5 minutes in any direction, and you'll run into several churches on the way. And so, like, there are lots of churches around our area, but there are 62% of the people in our area that do not associate themselves with any religious affiliation.
That's right. And that's the key is, we're not talking about, they just say, oh, well, I'm not a member of a church anywhere. No, they're saying they have none, absolutely zero religious affiliation.
Right.
And so that's 62% of our community. So that kind of makes up the majority. And then you have others, that are considered, he references as the dones, and they're kind of exiting established religions. You see it a lot in Christianity. I think you're seeing this kind of progressive Christianity movement. I would probably group some of them in the done category because, even though some of them end up deconstructing.
Yeah. So
along the line,
I think it'd be important for us to take a second and kind of define a couple of things when it comes to the done. So like you hear the word, you may have heard the word deconstruction before. It's this idea that I'm going to look at all of the beliefs that I have and I'm going to deconstruct them. I'm going to take them apart and decide what I like and what I don't like. And some people go through the process of deconstruction. And by the way, I think this happens to almost all of us as Christians when we take our faith seriously.
Sure.
Is we look at our inherited faith and we begin to figure out, okay, these are the pieces that make sense with what I see in Scripture, and these are the pieces that don't. And so I want to remove the pieces that don't. I want to deconstruct those. I want to take them away, and I want to reconstruct something that is more faithful to the Scriptures.
Yeah.
And sometimes that means changing like your faith tradition. You move from one denomination to another. Sometimes that means that you actually step into a denomination for the first time out of kind of I'm doing Christianity on my own. It can be done poorly where it's like, well, there are these aspects I don't like about this, and because I don't like these aspects, I'm just going to throw the whole thing out. That would be a very negative form of deconstruction. Another term that you might hear a lot if you kind of like start to think about these things is the term evangelical,
That's right.
where somebody who wasn't part of an evangelical tradition has now removed themselves from that for lots of reasons, possibly, and they no longer want to be identified as somebody who is an evangelical. Maybe not even a Christian, but definitely not an evangelical Christian.
And and I think it's like you said, there's some healthy pieces of that,
Sure.
right? Because anytime something kind of becomes unhealthy or sinful, within a church, it's important to kind of walk through that deconstruction process and make sure we're not so attached to an organization that we're detached from God's word, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what the dones are experiencing, right? They, perhaps, they've dealt with hurt in the church or seen others hurt or
physical abuse, spiritual abuse.
Yeah.
Like there are lots of things that have led some people just to step away from the church altogether and say, I'm done with that.
That's right.
Group.
That's right. And so I think, so we kind of had these two groups. You have the nuns who don't have any religious affiliation. Then you have the dones who formerly did, but now have completely taken themselves out of the equation, can completely separated themselves from it. Well, another group of individuals that this article references are the Umms.
Yeah.
Just like that, these vocal pauses, right? And these Umms, they're different in the fact that, they have religious affiliation, so they're not like the nuns. They haven't abandoned the church, so they're not like the dones. However, they have disengaged for various reasons. We've seen this in the church, since COVID. I think, I forget, churches on average right now are seeing about 55% of the attendance they were seeing pre-COVID.
Yeah, and just to like a bigger picture of what church attendance looks like nationwide since 2019 to 2021, it decreased from 34% of Americans were churchgoers to now it's at 28%.
28%.
And so we're talking about only a quarter of the population is a church attender. Now, I'm not really sure what they use to kind of figure out church attender. Does that mean somebody that comes, once a week, once a month, twice a year, that sort of thing. My guess is probably somebody that comes to about 25% of
Sure.
a year, and so you're talking about once a month. And so if that's the measure,
Yeah.
then only about a quarter of the entire population is going to church on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So out of that group, there's that group that 6% that they're the umms. They're not sure how to re-engage. I like the definition that Mike Moore gives us. He said, I would argue that many of those who have distanced themselves from church attendance, both in person and online, might be described as umms. Umms are a different category altogether, and the ones I've spoken with share several common characteristics. They are fond of the local church and were active members in the past. I think that's important for us to remember as we think about how we would engage this group of people. They take Jesus seriously and want to belong to a local congregation. They are not bitter or cynical, so this would distinguish them from the Duns. In fact, if anything, umms are uncomfortable with not being committed to a church body. The issue is that the umms are uncertain and hesitant about how to re-engage with church.
Yeah. And I think, I immediately kind of think of individuals I've interacted with who, you have that conversation with them and like, hey, we'd love to have you as part of my small group or worship service or whatever. And then they say, yeah, I know I need to, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a pretty good statement of your, umms, because they're like, they know the importance of being together as a body. Yes. They want to be a part of that, but throughout COVID, they've disengaged and kind of trying to figure out, what does that look like to re-engage? Mm-hmm. And so, I figure we can, the article kind of gives a few different categories or,
so subcategories
under
umms.
Yeah.
So these are four.
Yeah. And so let's, I'll read each of them briefly, and then let's just spend some time talking about each of those mm-hmm. and maybe how you relate or I relate to those, and then kind of figure out as we, those individuals who are listening to the podcast, if you're trying to figure out, I want to re-engage with people in our community, get them connected to a body of believers, mm-hmm. And you start interacting with these umms, you maybe talk through some practical tools and practical ways to do that. So the four kind of subcategories it talks about, they're disoriented, demotivated, discouraged, or disembodied. Mm-hmm. So the first one, the disoriented, basically these are groups of people who have had major life change, right? Over the past, year, 2 years, however long you want to look, they've lost their jobs. Maybe some of them have moved back home with their parents. Maybe some of them have shifted to a new career that's more demanding at work, whatever it might be. But they've kind of, had these significant life changes that have caused them to no longer be active mm-hmm. in the local church.
So this group right here was actually very interesting to me. Mm-hmm. Here's why. Because there's another book that I read a while back called Essential Church, and one of the things that Essential Church, Tom Rainer, mm-hmm. talks about in that book is the fact that what happens to a lot of young people is they get out of high school ministries, they go to college, they disengage from the church. Church may have been an important part of their past, but then when major significant life changes happen after college, they come back to the church. Mm-hmm. A good number of them do.
Sure.
And the reason why is because they need the stability of that community again. So it's interesting to me that the research is now showing that there's a group of people that are like, the disorientation is actually pushing me away from engaging.
Yeah.
And part of me makes me wonder, like, is that because church culture does not invite disorientation into it? Like if you don't have it all together, which major life change, kind of pushes you in that direction. You go through a divorce, you experience the loss of a job, you have young children, and your life is markedly not put together. You're trying to day by day, week by week make it. Is church a welcoming place for you? Or is it a place where, like, I look around and I see other people that look like they have it together, and I don't fit into that, so I don't feel like I can be here?
Yeah.
There's a part of me that wonders if that's the case.
Yeah. And then, of course, the other aspect of the disorientation side of it is, I think, individuals who kind of find community other places.
Yeah.
Like and you kind of have, groups who, whether it be work related, whether it be school related, extracurricular related, you have these other areas that you've gotten involved in, and they, are these kind of major, not to the extreme of life changes like loss of a job or some of those types of things, but it's life change where my kids, that's a significant life change, right? Typically, as you alluded to, the research previously said typically when young adults had kids, that's when they would return to church.
Right.
And you might still see some of that, but I think once kids hit elementary age, I feel like that's when you're starting to see another kind of recess now. And I think that they would kind of fall in that disoriented category where, when my kids have started playing sports, my kids have started to, doing, music lessons, and we have all these school programs afterwards. After school we have homework, we have all these things that prevent me from really engaging in the local church. And so, like, part of that, and of course the article talks about some of this a little bit later, but I think we've got to kind of redefine and refigure out what it means to not forsake the gathering together, right? And
because we have one answer to that right now.
Yeah.
And it's Sunday morning.
That's right.
That's the only time that we can gather together. I mean, there are exceptions to that, but that's the way we think about it when we think of when somebody quotes Hebrews 10, 24, 25, don't forsake the gathering together. Their thought is, well, that means Sunday morning. Mm-hmm. And there is some truth in that, but I think we can look at it in a bigger way. So we'll get to that more later.
Yeah, and that's where my mind goes with the disoriented people. Is like, a lot of times I would think, of course, you've done the travel baseball thing. Yeah. I'll not pick on it, but I'll use that as an example right now. Travel baseball, because of school and everything, it happens on the weekends, right? Mm-hmm. It's just part of it.
It has to from a scheduling perspective,
right? And so now parents are forced to kind of choose. Well, do I allow my kid to go deeper into baseball and allow him to have extra practices through the week so that we can travel on the weekends? Which means if we win on Saturday, we're going to have to play on Sunday.
Right.
Which means I will not be able to go to church on Sunday. And whether right or wrong, I'm not here to debate that side of it, but parents are choosing, hey, I want my kids to have these opportunities while they're young. They may or may not go off, professionally, but I want them to have these positive experiences.
Right.
Well, under our current format, it's really, kind of saying we're forcing them to say, okay, in this situation, you are now choosing, do you love Jesus and you want to come to church on Sunday, or do you love baseball and you want to go play that? When I think, there are more creative ways we can move from that, and we've just got to, again, break that mindset. And and if someone's in that category, like I said, I love my kid, right? Mm-hmm. You love your kids. If I've said for a long time that Maverick will not play travel baseball because of my role as a pastor. It's tough. That was something that you guys had to work through when you stepped into this role full time,
right?
But I want I've never been a baseball fan, but Maverick, he enjoys it. Mm-hmm. Who knows why, but he does. And so
this is the greatest game ever created.
It's debatable, but save that for another podcast. But
next week on the Ridgecrest podcast, we debate baseball versus all other sports. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, but I mean, so if he wants those opportunities, I don't look at that and say, well, nope, because I don't want to be the guy who says, nope, we're not going to let you do that because we've got to be at church on Sunday, which that's extremely important to me. Mm-hmm. But I think what that does is drives a wedge. Now all of a sudden Maverick sees church is the reason I didn't get to play baseball growing up as a kid. And then what kind of damage does that leave?
Yeah, it's definitely a difficult thing. And one thing that for a lot of people, because there are groups out there, there are parents that are probably struggling with, like, what do I do with this?
Right. They're disoriented, right?
Right.
They just don't know what to do.
So one thing that I would say to the people that are like, oh man, you need to get your kid in church, and you need to stay away from travel sports and like all those kind of arguments. One of the things that I think is not recognized by a lot of those people is that those organizations, those teams, families provide a sense of community that, for whatever reason, may be better than what the church provides.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that better in the sense that, like, it's qualitatively better spiritually for you.
Right.
I'm saying that the overall experience of community is stronger,
Yeah.
is deeper. You can share hurts and disappointments with one another because you're around each other.
Yeah.
And this is where the creativity comes in. Like, understanding that our call as believers is not simply to show up on Sunday morning to gather together and worship in corporate way. That is a part of what we should be about. We should be about corporate worship and gathering together and celebrating on a large scale and that sort of thing. But we can also create small groups where we have this same sense of community, and we build it around faith, and we understand that really this is more important than anything else that we can do.
Yeah.
But we're in a season of life where it's not as easy to show up on Sunday morning. Or even if we can show up on Sunday morning, it feels rushed.
Yeah.
I want something more, and so I want to add this to my life. I don't want to take this opportunity away. I want to create a way for me to have gospel community in more than one place.
That's right. And it definitely takes more intentionality,
Sure.
right? I mean,
Yes.
if you're going to say, well, I'm going to be do travel baseball or my whatever, and I threw out baseball because I know that's going on right now.
Yeah.
But whatever, we have soccer, we have all sorts of sports, and it's like, well, my kid's only young once. I want them to have these opportunities, and so if that means missing church on Sunday, which ultimately you're making that judgment call that is not as important than this, but I think we as a church are forcing people to make that judgment call because that's the only opportunity we're offering as far as that gathering together, or at least in their minds who are disoriented for this life change stage feel like that's the only opportunity. And we I think we've got to do a better job at being more intentional and saying, hey, how do we invite this community into some of these places, wherever it is, whatever life change they've faced that kind of makes them disoriented.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so the next category was the demotivated. These are the individuals who have kind of disengaged because of failures in the church. I think of the four, this was one that kind of stood out to me significantly because I immediately drew that connection to the Duns. I feel like these Umms are in a very critical place.
Yeah,
to where they could easily be pushed into the done category and be like, hey, I've had enough. I've seen church after church, go browse Apple News articles, and odds are you're going to find a church pastor who has fallen, right?
Right.
Because we're sinful people, and right now you've got the Hillsong stuff going on. And
there's a big documentary out right now, which I
Yeah.
haven't seen, so I'm not going to comment on it.
I haven't seen.
I know
it
it's
either.
out there.
Yeah, so you have those types of things, and very real issues that should be addressed, should be confronted. Again, I'm not alluding to the Hillsong because I don't know entirely everything that's went on there, but
I mean, you can point out that you got the Ravi Zacharias issue that happened several years ago. You had an incredible podcast that was put together on the rise and fall of Mars Hill and the claims of spiritual abuse that took place there, and the fall of their leader in that way. I mean, like I could list off a long list of celebrity, high profile preachers, pastors that have fallen and ultimately have led many people to question, what's going on with this thing that we call faith, and should I be a part of an organization that does these things, allows the leader to do these sorts of things, that sort of thing.
And this category, I mean, I get, right? Whenever you see failure, it's easy to immediately attach that failure to the organization as a whole. And so I get it, and
there are times where structurally the entire organization is to blame for certain things. I mean, like where there is collective blame that takes place and collective repentance that needs to happen as a result of it. I don't think it's wrong for a church to repent of the fact that we have created an organization where sometimes we value charisma over character.
Yeah.
Like, if somebody can speak well and draw a big crowd, we overlook character flaws.
Right.
Whereas if we look at the scripture, you and I read a really great book called Lead by Paul David Tripp.
That's right, yeah.
And in there, if you look at the qualification for a lead, elder, pastor, whatever you want to call it, almost all of the qualifications, with one exception, are character-based qualifications.
Yeah.
And think about the way we do search committees and the way we try to find the next lead pastor, or I would encourage people, if you're trying to find a gospel community, a church that you can call home, and you want to find a place where you don't end up in a situation that you could possibly end up as demotivated or done completely.
Mm-hmm.
Look carefully at the character of the individuals who lead it,
Yeah.
as much as you can. I mean, there are only so much you can do.
Yeah.
But talk to people about not about, is this guy a good preacher, or is this music do they do a good job musically or whatever. Talk to them about what are these people like in real life? How do they interact with you? What do they say when they're around you? When they're not around,
Yeah.
what are they like when you see them out in public? What are they like? How are they with their kids? How are they with your kids? Those are all things that should help us understand who we can trust and why we can trust those people. And I think that one of the ways that we can head off this. Now, this doesn't solve the issue of the fact that there are these people out there, but one of the ways that we can head that off is to raise up a generation that cares more about character than they do about charisma.
Yeah, that's good. And it's interesting. Of course, I'm working on my dissertation for my Doctor of Christian Leadership, and it's all about hiring church staff.
Yeah.
That's what my research is. And one of the key things I found in my interviews, and again, my research isn't completed, but it's pretty close. Just about every single person I interviewed, when asking them resume factors and qualifications and all these types of things, it always circled back well, we set wanted this many years of experience, wanted this degree or that degree or whatever. They had those things because that's what you do hiring somebody, right? But the basis, what they cared most about, was the individual's character.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is how do you find that character in an interview? Because interview, I can put on the best charismatic show I possibly can.
That's right.
And so I do think it creates a unique opportunity for churches to maybe reinvent how they hire,
Mm-hmm.
the intentionality of developing within and all those types of things, because in psychology they say you can hide who you truly are for about 6 months.
Yeah.
After 6 months, you can no longer pretend to be somewhere you're not.
Mm-hmm.
Because your natural psychology and being starts to come out. And so figuring out how to address some of those things before you even get to a 6 month down the road, oh man, this is not the guy we thought we were hiring.
That's right.
Yeah. We've discussed two of the kind of four categories of your Umms,
Right.
who have kind of disengaged from church. On the next episode, we'll jump in and kind of spend some time on the second half.
Sounds good.
All right.